There is one question almost no one will sit with for 10 seconds. Not whether you are rich, not whether you are loved. One question. The man you were 5 years ago, would he recognize the man watching this video right now? If he would, if nothing in your soul has been broken open and rebuilt since then, that is not stability. That is the sound of a door locking from the inside. The Stoics had a name for this man. Not unfortunate, not unlucky. Asleep. And the cruelest thing about sleep is this. It dreams. It dreams you are awake. You sign mortgages in your sleep. You raise children in your sleep. You climb careers in your sleep. And 80 years later, the dream ends, and you realize you were never inside your own life. You were a guest in it. Seneca was the richest man in Rome. He owned vineyards across 3 provinces, villas with marble floors his guests were afraid to step on. He was the personal tutor, and later the personal advisor, to the most powerful emperor of his age. By every metric your civilization worships, he had arrived. And still, several nights every single month, he locked the gates of his estate behind him. He took off his silk. He put on the roughest wool a peasant would wear. He ate the dry bread of the poorest farmer, and he slept on a stone floor. Not because he had to, because he had to remember he could. He wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it. You live as if you were destined to live forever. No thought of your own frailty ever enters your head." Understand what this man was doing. He was not punishing himself. He was not performing humility for an audience. He was emptying his own house before fate could rob it. Because a thief cannot steal from a man who has already given everything away in his own mind. This is the part most people miss. The man who has the most to lose is the man who must practice losing it the most. The richer you become, the colder the floor you must be willing to sleep on. Otherwise, what you own begins to own you. And one morning, without warning, you wake up and discover you have not been living your life. You have been guarding it. What follows are not tips. Tips decorate the man you already are. Truths break him. 5 of them. Some will land like accusations. That means they found the room they were looking for. Some you will already know, and you will discover painfully that knowing a truth and being shaped by one are 2 different countries. This video will not lift you. It will dismantle you. And whatever is left standing when it ends, that is who you actually are. Truth 1. Comfort. A man stands over another man, holding his leg. He is going to twist it. Slowly. Not because he needs to, because he wants to watch fear arrive on the face of the person he owns. But the man on the ground looks back at him calmly and says, "You are going to break it." The master keeps twisting. The bone gives. And the same voice, in the same tone, says, "Did I not tell you?" That man's name was Epictetus. He was born a slave in the Roman Empire. He owned nothing. He had been promised nothing. He limped for the rest of his life on the leg his owner shattered. And yet, years later, when he was free and teaching philosophy in Greece, powerful men of the empire came to sit at his feet and write down what he said. Sit with the gap between those 2 scenes. A slave broken on the floor. A philosopher respected by men who ruled cities. The entire first truth of this video lives inside that gap. How does a man go from being owned, injured, and humiliated to becoming someone history still listens to 2,000 years later? He did not get lucky. He trained for it, quietly, daily, for decades. And he trained for it long before anyone was twisting his leg. He trained on ordinary mornings when no one was watching, with no story to tell afterward, with nothing dramatic happening at all. A cold floor he did not have to sleep on. Simple food he did not have to eat. Silence he did not have to keep. One chosen discomfort at a time. The Stoics had a name for this. Askesis. Not denial. Architecture. The deliberate placing of weight on the human soul, the way a builder places weight on a beam, not to destroy it, but to discover what it can carry, and then to teach it to carry more. They also practiced something called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Every morning before the day touched them, they rehearsed difficulty, discomfort, failure, poverty, exile, loss, the body weakening, the future not obeying them, not to become dark, not to become paranoid, but to meet pain first in the mind before it could ambush them in life. Seneca wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, 'Is this the condition that I feared?'" Now stop. Answer honestly. When was the last time you were genuinely uncomfortable? And you chose it. Not stuck in traffic, not annoyed by a coworker, not tired because life forced it on you. Chose it. Walked willingly into discomfort when no one and nothing required you to. For many people, the answer is not last week, not last month. It is years ago. And that answer tells you something brutal. It has been years since your soul was asked to carry weight. A soul that carries nothing does not stay strong. It shrinks quietly, year by year, until a small inconvenience feels like an attack. A hard week feels like proof that life is against you. One email from someone you barely respect can decide your entire day. You did not become more sensitive. You became less rehearsed. This is the lie at the center of modern life. That comfort protects you. It does not. Comfort is a slow theft. Every avoided conversation makes the next one harder. Every skipped discipline makes the next skip easier. Every easy path adds distance to the hard path you will eventually be forced to walk. The comfortable life is not a soft chair. It is a room whose walls move inward a little every year, while you keep paying rent to stay inside it. And this brings us back to Epictetus. You will never be tested the way he was tested. Almost no one in your generation will. But the Stoics still put the question on the table. If you were, would you hold? And whatever your honest answer is, the next question matters more. Are you doing anything today to change it? Because training does not look like the test. The test is loud. Training is quiet. Training is the cold shower on the morning you wanted comfort. The hard conversation you have this week instead of postponing it for another year. 60 seconds of silence before reaching for your phone. Staying in the room when every comfortable instinct tells you to escape. One small, bitter, chosen swallow per day. Not because anyone forced you, because no one had to. That is askesis. That is what built the man who did not flinch when his leg snapped. And that is what builds the version of you who does not collapse the next time life twists something of yours. So here is the exercise. Tonight, choose one discomfort so small your ego cannot dramatize it. One cold minute. One honest sentence. One unfinished task completed before you touch your phone. One silence you do not rush to fill. Do it without announcing it, without posting it, without turning it into a performance. Then write one line. I chose this before life chose for me. Because the person who has trained himself to be okay with hard things is the only kind of person who is actually free. Not free from difficulty. No human being has ever been free from difficulty. Free within it. And that freedom is the one possession no employer, no relationship, no economy, no illness, and no government can take from you. Because you did not buy it. You gave it to yourself. in the dark, on the days no one was watching.
Truth 2. Control. Dichotomy of control.
For years, the empire had been breaking around him. The Antonine Plague had moved through Rome like a shadow no army could stop. Villages along the Danube had burned under Marcomanni raids. The treasury was strained, the grain supply was fragile, the frontiers were bleeding. And then, in 175 AD, one of the most trusted generals in the East, Avidius Cassius, heard a rumor that the emperor was dead, declared himself emperor, and began gathering support against him. The man at the center of all of it could not sleep. So somewhere in the cold darkness of the northern frontier, with no audience, no applause, no scribe waiting to record his greatness, Marcus Aurelius reached for his private notes. Not as a strategist, not as an emperor, as a tired man speaking to his own mind. Again and again, he returned to the same brutal idea. The world outside him was not his to command. The plague was not his to command. The betrayal was not his to command. The empire itself was not fully his to command. What belonged to him was smaller, harder, and infinitely more important. His judgment, his response, his inner life. That is why his private writings survived 20 centuries. Not because they were written by the most powerful man in the world, but because they reveal the one truth even the most powerful man in the world could not escape. You do not control life. You control the mind that meets it. Now sit with that. Marcus Aurelius governed one of the largest empires history had ever seen, and still had to remind himself, in private, that he did not own the world. Not the plague, not the war, not the loyalty of his generals, not the future of Rome. The only territory he could truly govern was the small, silent room inside himself. And you? You think you can control what a coworker you barely know will think of an email you have not even sent? That is the second truth of this video. It is not what you think it is. For many of you, what you call anxiety is not fear. It is the craving for control. And the two feel almost identical from the inside, which is why you have spent years confusing one for the other. The Stoics drew a line through all of human experience. On one side, the things in your control, your choices, your actions, your words, your discipline, your character, your willingness to do what is right when no one is watching. On the other side, everything else. Other people's opinions, other people's moods, the timing of opportunity, the outcome of a decision, the past, the future, the weather, the market, the body aging, the world changing, the thousand invisible forces that move through a life without ever asking your permission. Epictetus made this the first sentence of his entire philosophy. Some things are in our control, and others are not. 6 words. 2,000 years later, most people still fail to live by them. Because look honestly at the last 7 days of your life. How much of your mind was spent on things you could actually act on? And how much was spent rehearsing conversations that never happened, defending yourself against accusations no one made, predicting judgments from people who were not even thinking about you, and trying to guarantee outcomes that were never guaranteed to begin with? That was not preparation. That was anxiety wearing the costume of responsibility. And anxiety in costume has one job: to convince you that if you worry hard enough, long enough, and thoroughly enough, you can somehow reach across the line and bend the uncontrollable side of life to your will. You cannot. You never have. No amount of worry has ever forced a person to respect you. No amount of mental rehearsal has ever controlled another person's reaction. No amount of fear has ever reached backward and repaired the past. Worry is not paying a debt. Worry is shouting at the weather. And here is the part most people do not want to hear. For many of you, Anxiety is no longer just something you feel. It has become something you use to explain who you are. When someone asks how you are doing, you say, busy. You say, stressed. You say, it's a lot right now. And hidden inside those answers is a strange comfort. Because being busy makes you feel important. Being stressed makes you feel needed. Being anxious makes you feel responsible. Being overwhelmed makes you feel like you care. So slowly, without noticing it, you begin to wear exhaustion like proof of virtue. You begin to treat your nervous system as evidence that your life matters. You mistake the symptoms of a sickness for the uniform of a serious person. The Stoics would have seen this clearly. They would have called it a vice dressed as a virtue. And that is the most dangerous kind of vice, because the world will praise you for it. No one will tell you to put it down. They will call you hardworking. They will call you devoted. They will call you responsible. But real responsibility is not the same as worry. Real care is not the same as anxiety. Real effort is not the same as trying to control what was never yours to control. One of those is virtue. The other is a counterfeit you have been spending for so long that you forgot it was fake. The Stoic answer was not coldness. It was not emotional numbness. It was not pretending that pain does not hurt, betrayal does not wound, or uncertainty does not frighten you. The Stoic answer was precision, to know with ruthless clarity where your power ends, and then to stop wasting your life beyond that border. Later, Nietzsche would give a name to a similar idea, amor fati, love of fate. Not merely endure what happens, not merely tolerate it, love it. Not because it is pleasant, not because it is fair, but because it is here, because it is real, because it is the raw material from which your character must now be built. A person who can love what happens to him, even the parts he did not choose, becomes very difficult to defeat. Not because nothing can hurt him, but because nothing can make him abandon himself. So ask yourself this, and do not answer too quickly. What would open inside your life if you stopped trying to control the opinions of people who will never make a single, meaningful decision about your future? What would return to you if you stopped rehearsing arguments that may never happen? What would you finally have energy for if you stopped donating your attention to ghosts? Because that is what much of your anxiety is. It is energy given to ghosts. Ghost conversations, ghost judgments, ghost futures, ghost versions of yourself standing trial in rooms that do not exist. The Stoics would take that energy back. They would use it for the only work that actually belongs to a human being. To act with courage, to speak with honesty, to choose with discipline, to endure with dignity, to tend the only garden over which you have any real authority, the one inside yourself. The practice is small. It is daily. It is unglamorous, and it will work if you stop treating it like an idea and start treating it like a blade. The next time you feel the pull of anxious rehearsal, the imagined argument, the unsent email, the future you are trying to control from your bed at 2 a.m., stop. Ask one question, out loud if you have to. Is this in my control, or is it not? If it is in your control, act. Write the sentence. Make the call. Tell the truth. Apologize. Prepare. Train. Do the next clean thing in front of you, and then release it. If it is not in your control, release it immediately. Not someday. Not after you have worried about it for another hour. Now. In that exact second. You will fail at this. You will fail at it constantly. So did every Stoic who ever lived. Marcus failed at it on the very pages of the journal we still read. That is why he kept writing. Not because he had mastered himself once and for all, but because mastery had to be returned to, night after night, thought after thought, crisis after crisis. Failing is not the problem. Forgetting to return is. Control what you can. Release what you cannot. Learn the difference with surgical clarity. This is not passivity. Passivity is what happens when you give up on the line entirely. This is precision. And precision, practiced in the dark with no audience, is how Marcus endured his empire. It is how you will endure your life. Truth 3. Approval. Doxa / hegemonikon. Rome, after a major victory. The streets are lined with citizens. They are cheering one man's name. The Senate has just decreed him a living god. Coins are being minted with his face. Statues are being carved in his image, in cities he has never visited, in provinces he will never see, by people who will never meet him, on the basis of stories about him that are not entirely true. By every measure your civilization understands as success, this man has been completely, unanimously, ecstatically approved of. That night he goes back to his rooms. He sends the attendants away. He picks up his journal, the same journal we have been quoting from, and he writes himself a private warning. Not in celebration, in defense. I have often wondered how it is that every man loves himself more than all the rest of men, but yet sets less value on his own opinion of himself than on the opinion of others. That sentence is Marcus Aurelius, at the peak of being adored by an empire, sitting alone, reminding himself that the applause of strangers is not evidence that he has lived a single hour correctly. Sit with that for a second. The most adored man in the known world had to write himself, in private, a sentence telling himself not to believe any of it. And you? You can be ruined for an entire afternoon by the wrong emoji. This is truth 3. And it is one of the truths that quietly costs you more years of your life than almost anything else. The version of you that everyone approves of is not you. It is your cage. There was a moment, and you may not remember exactly when, but it happened, when a younger version of you ran a small calculation. It might have been on a playground. It might have been at a dinner table with parents who praised silence over honesty. It might have been in the first serious relationship where loving you correctly seemed to require shrinking some part of you. It might have been the first job where being liked paid better than being right. Whenever it was, you noticed something. A specific version of you got a better response, quieter, smaller, more agreeable, less complicated, less honest, less needy, less alive. And so, slowly, without ever making a conscious decision, without ever telling anyone, not your friends, not your spouse, not even yourself, you began to build a self that was engineered for approval instead of for truth. You did not build it on purpose. You did not build it overnight. You did not even build it knowing you were building it. You built it the way coral builds a reef, one tiny, automatic, unnoticed layer at a time, year after year, until one day you turned around and could no longer see the original architecture underneath. The Stoics had a name for this. They called living by the judgments of other people doxa, mere opinion. And they identified it as one of the deepest sources of human suffering. Not because opinion is evil, because opinion is unstable. It moves with the room. It moves with the season. It moves with whoever is currently the loudest. And a life anchored to it is a life anchored to nothing, Marcus wrote. And this line has survived 2,000 years for a reason. How much trouble he avoids, who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does or thinks, but only to what he himself does. That sentence was not written by a monk in a cave. It was written by the one man in the empire who had more reason than anyone alive to care what his neighbors thought of him. Because his neighbors were the citizens of Rome. And here is the harsh part of Truth 3. The part most people will not let themselves feel. The people whose approval you have been performing for. Most of them are not thinking about you. They're too busy performing for someone else. The entire structure of social anxiety, the whole weight of it, the years of your life it has eaten, is built on a mutual illusion. Everyone is performing, everyone is monitoring, everyone is curating. And everyone is doing it for an audience that is too preoccupied with their own performance to actually watch yours. You have been auditioning for 40 years for a panel of judges who left the theater before you arrived. And in the middle of all of that performance, your actual self, the one that has been waiting for you to come home, has been sitting quietly. Not gone, not destroyed, neglected. The Stoics had a word for that self too. Hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, the sovereign core. The one part of a human being that cannot be touched by external opinion unless the person hands them the key. Most people hand over the key on the first day of secondary school, and then they spend the next 40 years quietly trying to get it back. Some of them never do. Now I have to be precise here, because this truth gets distorted into something cheap if you let it. Authenticity does not mean indulgence. It does not mean saying whatever you think, regardless of who it hurts. It does not mean treating other people as obstacles to your self-expression. It does not mean abandoning your obligations because they are inconvenient. The modern self-help industry has sold you a costume version of this truth and called it being yourself. And the costume version is a lie. Stoic authenticity is harder than the costume. It is older than the costume. And it asks more of you than the costume ever will. It means living according to the values that actually govern your private decisions, not the values you claim in public. It means being willing to disappoint people you love in order to remain honest with them. It means choosing a life that is genuinely yours, even when no one in the room applauds it. It means treating your hegemonikon as something you owe a debt to, not something you spend on whoever happens to be watching this week. Seneca wrote one short line about this in a letter to his friend Lucilius. Recede in te ipse. Retire into yourself, not as withdrawal from the world, as a return to the only self that was ever actually yours. So here's the question that will tell you everything. The question that, if you let it, will quietly reorganize the next decade of your life. Answer it honestly, in your own head, right now. If no one who knew you could ever find out, what would you change about your life? The job you would leave, the relationship you would end, the relationship you would begin, the truth you would finally say out loud, the book you would write, the faith you would return to, or finally leave. The conversation with a parent you have been postponing for 9 years. The version of yourself you would stop apologizing for. That answer is not a fantasy. That answer is a map. It is showing you, with a precision no therapist and no philosopher will ever give you, exactly where the performance ends and the person begins. The Stoics did not pursue a life that looked good. They pursued a life that was good. Those are not the same life. They have never been the same life. And in the quiet hours, after the audience has gone home and the lights are off, and there is no one left to perform for, every adult on earth already knows which of the two they have actually been chasing. The work of Truth 3 is small. You do not need to burn your life down. You do not need to quit anything tomorrow. You only need to do one thing, once, today, that is honest at the cost of approval. One sentence said, one sentence unsaid, one opinion held instead of softened, one quiet no, where you have been giving automatic yeses for a decade. Do it without explanation. Do it without justification. Do it the way you would take back a key that has been in someone else's pocket for 30 years. Because the day you stop being audited by ghosts is the day the real version of your life, the one that was waiting underneath the performance, finally gets to begin.
Truth 4. Time, memento mori.
Rome, 65 AD.
A centurion is walking through the marble corridors of a private villa on the outskirts of the city. He has been sent personally by the Emperor Nero. He carries one order, written in a single line. The philosopher who lives in this villa is required to take his own life before sundown.
The philosopher is Seneca. He is 68 years old. He is at dinner with his wife and his closest students when the order arrives. He does not panic. He does not beg. He does not ask for mercy. He asks for one thing only: permission to update his will so he can leave his belongings to his friends. Permission is denied, so Seneca turns to his friends, and instead of weeping, instead of cursing the emperor, instead of running, he does something almost no one in his position has ever done in the entire recorded history of the human species. He starts dictating. As the doctors open the veins of his arms, then his legs, then lift him into a warm bath to hasten the bleeding, Seneca continues to speak. About philosophy, about death, about time, about the only possession a Roman emperor could not confiscate. His villa could be taken. His fortune could be taken. His body could be taken. But the hours he had already used well, those were beyond Nero's reach. And that is what Seneca was demonstrating in real time, in his own last hour. The truth he had spent his entire adult life writing about was no longer an idea on a page. It was happening in his veins. He had been preparing for that afternoon for 40 years. Now compare that to your relationship with your last Tuesday. This is Truth 4, and it is the truth this entire video has been quietly walking you toward. You have already wasted time. You cannot recover any of it, and that is exactly why you cannot afford to waste another day. Seneca opened his most famous essay on the subject, on the shortness of life, with a sentence that should be carved into every office lobby, every university wall, every bathroom mirror in the modern world. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it. He was not comforting his readers. He was confronting them, because the problem has never been that life is short. The problem is that you live as if you have already been guaranteed years you have not yet earned. You spend tomorrow as if it has been promised to you in writing. It has not. Not one more sunset. Not one more breakfast with a parent. Not one more conversation with a child while that child is still small enough to need you. Now listen carefully to the most dangerous word you use when you are lying to yourself. Someday. Someday I will have the hard conversation. Someday I will start taking care of this body. Someday I will write the thing I have been carrying inside me for 15 years. Someday I will tell the people I love what they actually mean to me. Someday I will leave the job that is quietly eroding the part of me I most want to protect. Someday I will become the person I keep promising my children, my partner, and my own private mirror that I am almost ready to become. But someday is not a day. It is not on any calendar. It has no sunrise. It has no deadline. It has no place in the record of human time. Someday is a story you tell yourself to make avoidance feel like patience. And every time you use it, you spend a day of an inheritance you cannot replenish on a future that does not exist. The Stoics had a practice for this. They called it memento mori. Remember that you will die. The phrase has been cheapened by skull tattoos, social media captions, and decorative darkness. So hear it again the way Seneca meant it. Not as a mood, not as an aesthetic, not as pessimism, as radical clarity. The Roman general, at his triumph, heard a slave whisper into his ear, "Remember, you are mortal." At the exact moment he was most likely to mistake applause for immortality, someone reminded him that the clock was still moving. That is what memento mori is. Not a fascination with death, a rescue from sleep. Because the person who genuinely remembers, not intellectually but in the marrow of his bones, that he is mortal, does not waste his Tuesday. And now we arrive at the part of Truth 4 most people will try to avoid. You cannot get the years back. You cannot get back the decade you spent in the wrong relationship because leaving felt too dramatic. You cannot get back the 7 years you gave to a career that paid you just enough to keep you asleep. You cannot get back the conversation you postponed until the person you needed to speak to was no longer there. That time is gone. No book will return it. No prayer will return it. No therapist, no promotion, no inheritance, no late life epiphany will hand it back to you. And the Stoics would say, good. Not because loss is beautiful, not because regret is noble, but because grief for lost time, properly aimed, is one of the most powerful fuels a human being has ever had access to. Not as a punishment, as an engine. Marcus Aurelius wrote one sentence for this: confine yourself to the present. Not because the past does not matter, not because the future is unimportant, but because the present is the only place where a human being can still act. The past is closed for repairs. The future is locked. The present is the only door that opens. And here is what almost everyone gets wrong about this truth, including the self-help industry that has been selling it back to you in cheap packaging for 50 years. The Stoic relationship with time is not about urgency. It is not about hustle. It is not about the panicked acceleration of a man trying to outrun a clock. It is about stewardship. It is about treating one ordinary day as a life in miniature. Because days are what lives are made of. Not chapters, not seasons, not decades, days. And whatever you do at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday is, eventually, what you will have done with your life. Seneca wrote one short line to his friend Lucilius that compresses this entire truth into 7 words of Latin. Omnia lucili aliena sunt, tempus tantum nostrum est. Everything is alien to us, Lucilius. Time alone is ours, not your reputation. That belongs to other people's perception, and perception moves with the weather, not your property. Circumstance can lift it from you in a single afternoon. Not even your relationships. They are not wholly within your authority, no matter how deeply you love the people inside them. But the way you spend your hours, that is the one possession in the entire human experience that is irreducibly, non-negotiably yours. It is the only thing Nero could not order Seneca to surrender. So here is the practice for Truth 4. It is small. It is daily. And if you actually do it, it will begin to separate you from almost everyone around you. Once today, before you sleep, ask one question, not as performance, not as a journaling exercise, as a question to your own face in the mirror. If today were a sample of the rest of my life, would I be satisfied with how I just spent it? You will not like the answer on many nights. That is the point. The discomfort is the instrument. The discomfort is the only feedback loop honest enough to move you. Every other measurement of your life can be lied to. This one cannot. Truth 4 is not asking whether you have wasted time. You have. Everyone has. Seneca has. Marcus has. The wisest people who ever lived were not the people who had never wasted years. They were the people willing to look directly at the years they had handed away to nothing, and then stop handing away the hour in front of them. So the question is not whether time has been lost. The question is whether you will let the fact that you have wasted time become the reason you waste what remains. Because the years you have wasted cannot be argued with. The hour you are sitting in right now still can. Truth 5. Virtue. Eudaimonia. Vindobona. The Roman military outpost on the cold edge of the Danube, the place your maps now call Vienna. The year is 180 AD. Inside a campaign tent, on a soldier's cot, a 58-year-old man is dying. He has been the emperor of Rome for 19 years. He has fought a war on this frontier for more than half of his reign. The plague that has been killing his soldiers for 15 years has finally found him. His doctors know.
His son knows. The Praetorian Guard standing at the entrance of the tent knows. His officers come in for final orders. He waves them away. He gives one instruction, which the historians of his age recorded as best they could. Go to the rising sun. I am already setting. Quote, asterisk, dot quote. Then he turns toward the wall. There is a journal beside the cot. Even now, even dying, he is still writing in it. Not a will. Not a victory speech. Not instructions for the empire that will outlive him by a few short hours. He is writing practice notes to himself. Reminders to be patient. Reminders to be honest. Reminders to act from reason and not from fear. The same kind of notes he has been writing to himself in private every morning for almost 20 years. The most powerful man in the known world is dying on a soldier's cot. And the last thing he is doing with his life is rehearsing how to be a better human being. That man was Marcus Aurelius. And this is Truth 5. The truth that recasts everything you just heard in the first 4. Virtue is not a reward you receive at the end of a good life. It is the method by which a good life is built, one action at a time. The modern world is more unprepared for this truth than for any of the others, because the entire architecture of the age you live inside has inverted the relationship between character and outcome. You have been quietly told by almost every voice that addresses you that the sequence works like this. First you achieve, then you become. You will be generous when you finally have enough to give. You will be patient when life finally stops demanding so much. You will be honest when the stakes are low enough that honesty is no longer expensive. You will be disciplined when conditions finally improve. You will be a better person someday when the world has been kind enough to make it convenient. The Stoics looked at this entire scaffolding of postponement and identified it as one of the most efficient ways a human being has ever invented to waste an entire life without noticing. They had a single word for what a human being most needs, the condition toward which all of their philosophy ultimately points: eudaimonia. It is usually translated into your language as happiness, and that translation fails almost completely. Eudaimonia is not a feeling. It is not a mood. It is not the warm glow you get when life is briefly behaving. Eudaimonia is a condition. The condition of a human being who is functioning according to their highest nature. And the Stoics were absolutely clear, across 2,000 years of writing about it, on how that condition is reached. Not by acquiring, by becoming. The 4 cardinal virtues of the entire Stoic system, wisdom, justice, courage, temperance, were never aspirational goals. They were not achievements to be unlocked after sufficient success. They were not trophies handed to you once your bank account, your title, and your followers had grown enough to deserve them. They were practices, daily, moment to moment, unglamorous, performed in rooms with no audience, repeated for decades. Every time you tell the truth in a moment when a lie would have been cheaper, that is courage practiced. Every time you stop before judging another person to consider what their week, their childhood, their grief, their fear might actually look like from inside their own skull. That is justice practiced. Every time you feel the pull toward one more drink, one more scroll, one more bite, one more impulsive sentence, and you wait 10 seconds before deciding, that is temperance practiced. Every time you respond to a difficult moment from understanding rather than from reaction, that is wisdom practiced. That is the entire system. Not lofty, not theatrical, not reserved for monks or emperors or saints. Small, daily, yours.
Marcus Aurelius did not write Meditations because he had achieved virtue. He wrote Meditations because he was actively, daily, imperfectly working toward it. And he needed to remind himself in private to continue. The book you can still buy in any airport in the world was never meant for any of us. It was a private gym for one man's character. A man who was failing at being patient, failing at being kind, failing at being just to people who did not deserve his patience, and trying again the next morning anyway. This is why the most important word in the entire Stoic ethical vocabulary is not virtue. It is practice. Because virtue is not a destination you arrive at. It is a direction you continuously choose. And here is the harsh edge of Truth 5, the part the modern world will resist the hardest. There is no point at which you are done. There is no level of success that graduates you from the practice of becoming a better human being. There is no amount of money that releases you from the obligation. There is no degree of recognition that converts you automatically into the person you keep promising yourself you will eventually become. The work is not preparation for the life. The work is the life. The Stoics would look at the modern obsession with self-improvement and see something almost tragic. Correct in its instinct, completely wrong in its direction. You optimize your productivity and neglect your honesty. You track your steps and ignore your integrity. You build your profile and abandon your character. You become highly visible and quietly invisible to yourself. They had a phrase for the person who accumulates achievements without developing character. Rich in externals, bankrupt in internals. And they had a quiet, devastating word for what that person eventually discovers, often very late, often in a hospital room, often in a marriage that is already over by the time he notices it has been over for years. That none of it is enough. That none of it was ever enough. That none of it was ever going to be enough. Because you cannot fill an interior emptiness with exterior acquisitions. That is not a poetic line. That is a structural fact of being human. You can stack achievements against the inside of yourself for 60 years, and the inside will remain, to the millimeter, exactly as empty as you left it. The only thing that fills it is the slow, unglamorous daily work of becoming the person you were capable of being. Virtue is not the reward. Virtue is the work. And the work is the point. So here is the practice, the last one, the smallest one, the one that, if you actually do it, quietly rewrites the next decade of your life. Tomorrow morning, before you check your phone, before you open any application, before the world has had its first chance to perform at you, choose one virtue for the day. Just one. Wisdom, justice, courage, temperance. Pick whichever one your honest mirror is most embarrassed by. And then live the next 16 hours as the person who is practicing that one thing. Not flawlessly, not heroically, but deliberately. Then do it again the next day, and the next, and the one after that. That is the entire Stoic curriculum. 2,000 years of philosophy distilled into something so small that you could begin it before this video has finished playing. 5 truths, not 5 steps, not 5 hacks, not 5 days to a better you. 5 truths that the Stoics lived with and died with across 2,000 years of human history. That comfort is the gentlest form of self-destruction ever invented, and that the room you call safe has been quietly shrinking around you for years. That control is mostly an illusion, and that the freedom you have been searching for is sitting on the other side of accepting which half of life was never yours to manage. That the version of you everyone approves of is not you, has never been you, and that the cage you have been polishing for 40 years was built from your own willingness to be liked.
That time does not wait, has never waited, will never wait. And that the only rational response to having wasted any of it is to waste less of what is left. And that virtue is not what you receive at the end of a good life. It is the method by which a good life is built. One decision, one moment, one ordinary, unwitnessed day at a time. These truths were never designed to be easy to hear. The Stoics had no interest in philosophy that made you feel better. They had an interest in philosophy that made you better. The distinction is the entire point. Because the world you live inside is full of things that will make you feel better for an hour. A scroll, a drink, a distraction, a validation, a purchase, a like. And every one of them is free or close to it. The things that will actually make you better will cost you something. They will ask you to be more honest than you are comfortable being, more disciplined than you are used to being, more willing to be uncomfortable than you have been since you were young enough that no one had yet taught you how to avoid it, more willing to be seen as you actually are, rather than as you wish to appear. And one more thing. The Stoics were not perfect. Not one of them. Seneca accumulated tremendous wealth while writing essays about the spiritual dangers of wealth. Marcus Aurelius struggled with anger for his entire adult life while writing some of the most quoted lines on patience ever produced by the human species. Epictetus taught the philosophy of inner freedom while living for years inside literal chains. They were not masters, they were practitioners. And that is precisely what makes them worth listening to 20 centuries later. Not the perfection, the practice. Not the arrival, the direction. The Stoic path is not a destination you reach. It is a way you move through the world. Slowly, deliberately, with your eyes open. Knowing what is yours to control, releasing what is not. Choosing discomfort when discomfort is what makes you stronger. Dropping the performance when the performance has begun costing you the only life you are ever going to get. Spending your hours as if you understand what they are worth. Building your character as if you understand that, in the end, it is the only thing that will still belong to you. Marcus Aurelius wrote one final line, and I want to leave it with you exactly as he wrote it. It was not addressed to armies. It was not addressed to Rome. It was addressed to himself, in private, in the middle of a life that was harder than most of us will ever know. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Not tomorrow. Not when conditions improve. Not when you feel ready. Now. The Stoics are not asking you to be flawless. They never asked anyone to be flawless. They are asking you to begin, and then to keep beginning every single day until the beginning is no longer effort, until it is simply who you are. So here is the only thing I will ask of you before this video ends. Sit down. 60 seconds. Write one sentence, just one, about a single thing you will do before you go to sleep tonight that you've been postponing for far too long. Not a plan, not a system, one sentence, one thing, tonight. Then come down to the comments and leave one word. Begun. No explanation, no paragraph, no performance. One word. Because the work of Truth 5 does not begin with a speech. It begins with a quiet, witnessed mark in the world that says, I have started, asterisk. Because the next 5 years of your life are not going to be decided by the next 5 years. They're going to be decided by tonight.